So to begin, we'll look at some of the historical influences on the multicultural society, at least in the modern age, beginning probably most recognizably is with the post-World War II era. This is due in part to the increased role of the United States on the world stage, especially with the success of the Marshall Plan for the European Recovery Program, was a project put in place at the Paris Economic Conference in 1947 to foster economic recovery in certain European countries after World War II. And so a lot more dialogue was going on, a lot more interaction as well. Other international activities include that promoted international economy, obviously technology, the internet, just most recently, social development, the increase of foreign exchange students, the Peace Corps alliances with other countries, the United Nations, control outbreaks of wars and human atrocities. So a lot more interaction going on in between countries as a result of the aftermath of World War II. And then, of course, things increasing as a result to where we see today, obviously, with the speed of travel, with airlines, communication, with computers, internet, mobile devices, cell phones, a lot of different things influencing culture. We talked earlier in a previous module about the media, and that obviously has had a huge effect as well. So along with the influences, historical influences, it also presented some major challenges. Obviously, without understanding other cultures or having information base educated on or why cultures do what they do rather than, oh, it's different and therefore it's wrong attitude, without having good understanding of what other cultures and why they do things, really causes people to act out of ignorance in their responses. And for an unfortunate period of time, popular book was called The Ugly American. This was coming out of the 50s, early 60s, where this was a huge issue with Americans traveling overseas and being loud and gregarious and somewhat offensive to other places when they traveled and things like that, and not taking into consideration other people's cultures and doing things that they would normally do in America that weren't necessarily acceptable in other countries. Globalization has expanded so much with business professionals, students going all over the world as exchange students coming in, expatriates working in other countries. All these challenges gave rise to the need to have some form of training to where they would help people going into different cultures and helping to prepare them for the things that they were going to experience and to help develop their intercultural sensitivity. This continues to be a challenge even today as things are continue to be learned and people struggle and come back and can inform those who do the training in different areas related to setting up home, schooling for the kids, communication, just all different sort of things out there that will influence people for being successful in a different culture. Then we'll move into a little bit of a discussion about adaptation. We talked about that as well in one of the earlier modules. But here again, we're talking about helping people assimilate and learn about a new culture and to be successful in that culture with the amount of growth and ease of travel for people to go back and forth, to go to other countries and be there on an airline, a jet airline, and matter of hours, provides people so many more opportunities today. And so as we talked about culture shock, we're going to now look at some things, some diagrams and things like that in the next couple slides, some illustrations, some of the experiences that people go through as they assimilate and go into another culture and work through that adaptation process. And we'll see how critical that the early period of a person's stay in a different culture is to their ultimate success. Here we see on the left on this diagram is the degree of adjustment, and then on the bottom is the time in months. And so we see that the amount of time you spend in a culture will affect the amount of adjustment and the amount of satisfaction that you ultimately have in working in a different culture. The first few months, extremely difficult. You come off the honeymoon, months 3 to 4, 4 to 6, pretty much in that 4 to 6 area is pretty tough till you start coming out of it after months 6 through 9 and begin to adjust and have some success. And one of the things that the study found by Leisgard, who first identified this, was that the success rate for folks working in different cultures was heavily dependent on their satisfaction of their job and what they were doing. So whether you're an educator or a trainer for another company, believing in what you're doing and having the desire and the passion for your work is a huge predictor of your success and really does play an important role. But you see this U curve here and the importance of the first year in particular, making making it through that first year, moving on then to the second, third, fourth years of really becoming more of a master in that culture and being adjusted. So this is the U curve, and we'll next look at a W curve. So here as we look at the W curve, you're going through somewhat similar to the same process, except just a little bit different, more of a peaks and valleys. I think, as I discussed in an earlier module, sometimes the stresses of being in a different culture will affect you. So you maybe not have a culture shock where you go way down deep, one of these peaks like in the area of 3 here on the diagram, or 7, but the stress is wearing on you, and then you have so many events like that that ultimately lead you into culture shock. But hopefully the longer the time you spend in a country, the less those will become. However, understanding and realizing that you're going through all this, you have a honeymoon stage, and then you have the acceptance and the developing strategies to cope, and coming out of your feeling homesick and depressed, finding ways within the culture to keep yourself motivated, developing friendships, find things within the culture that excite you, can be a huge predictor into your success as well. So the W curve is just a different way of looking at it. I think it provides a little bit different nuance and maybe kind of help you see that not just do you actually feel that U curve that we saw on the previous slide, but you may go in up and down at certain times through your experience, even though you may have been there longer than a year. After year 2 or 3, maybe you'll experience something again where you dip down in the W curve. So just wanted you to be aware of that as well, but to be able to develop strategies to pull out of that and to become more of an adjusted and adapted into a new culture as you acculturate and assimilate into that new culture. Therefore, I think looking at the previous 2 slides and realizing the issues of working in a multicultural society, how it's changing so much, and going through these different periods of culture stress and culture shock, how important it is to have and to design new training techniques for the changing global society and for working within a multicultural society. So pretty much beg, borrow, and steal. You work through some different ideas in previous modules of being able to think through a strategy maybe where you integrate different process, some experiential along with some didactic teaching. Not as it just one, you're giving training or teaching someone about things just by giving them data, but you're also putting them in case studies or in role playing, things like that to kind of help work through it, even using computer and animations to work through different case studies and scenarios that you can experience with computer programs and things like that. Lots of neat things that are out there to help us with realism and realistic settings and things, videos, and using movies and all kinds of documentaries that are out there, as well as tapping other people that maybe have worked in that culture and some of the things that they'd gone through, and to be able to share that with the group and to provide a channel or an outlet where people, when they go through these experiences, can reach out to someone without feeling that they're a bad person or that they're going to be sent home if they have feelings, but that they can just have someone where it's a sounding board to be able to share some of the feelings that they're going through when they're feeling culture stress or culture shock, and to just be able to have a sounding board to express some of those issues and feelings. I think those are some things that we need to really consider moving forward as things continue to change so much. And the other thing is even providing folks opportunities for R&R and making sure that that's being done and taken care of. So when people get worn down, they don't go into a place where their emotions take over and become depressed. So providing outlets, activities like that can encourage and keep the folks that you're working with, whether it's in an education institution or an HR training, you're doing the training, leading that for a company, finding creative ways to help with the assimilation process for the people that you're working with. So as we move into the conclusion summary of this presentation, I think this question is good to consider, is that how is personal change associated with cultural adaptation? For you personally, how will helping you change your attitude, or are you going to be stuck in the ways that you think? If you're not willing to change, can you really think that you're going to be successful in a different culture? If you're pretty much stuck that your way is the right way, are you willing to be able to change and to think about things differently and be open to differences? I think this is something that we really need to consider and think through seriously before jumping in and saying, oh, I can do this or do that, and not really understand the ramifications of how it takes to work in a multicultural society and being more accepting and willing to consider things from a different angle and a different viewpoint than coming over as the ugly American with all the right ideas and trying to change others into your way of thinking, but rather how can you change your mindset of how I can educate and work with these people in my host culture and use their culture in a meaningful way to communicate the things that you want to teach and things that you want to provide training in all those areas. Really, it's more about us changing than us trying to change somebody else on the other side in a different culture. So ultimately, I think we need to consider these ideas in terms of differences rather than as a deficit in a different culture. Well, they don't know any better. They're doing it that way and they're wrong. My way's the right way. No, think of it more as it's just different. It's not necessarily wrong. It's cultural. Things are different culturally and it's not a negative. Many times maybe a different way of doing things, maybe even a better way, or a way maybe you've never even considered and maybe ought to try. Ultimately, to be successful in our ability to change is to really to change our thinking about how we think about other things, other ways of doing things, rather than thinking that it's wrong because you were accustomed to doing things a certain way, but to think more of it as just a different way to do it. And that's many times can be more freeing and liberating and be more accepting of the way cultures and people in other cultures work in the multicultural society that we all are wanting to work in and maybe already currently are working in. That can go a long way in helping to diffuse a lot of the frustration and the cultural stresses and culture shocks that we go through, because so many things are different. The language is different. The way people interact with one another is different than we do. Maybe the skin color is different. Maybe hair is different. Hair color is different. Maybe the way their facial structure is different. Everything is so different. And think of that as not wrong, but just different. I think that would be the proper mindset, because if we think of it as a negative, that's something that's really going to hinder our effectiveness, and most candidly probably means that we're going to be coming back home to our home country because we're just not going to be able to be successful because we're not being willing to be flexible. Just hope these thoughts here in this presentation have been helpful for you and for this module. So thank you for listening.